Congress just called NASA's moon program broken. SpaceX got the hardest mission with the smallest budget and tightest timeline, while NASA and Boeing burned decades and billions on rockets that can barely do the job. Now, here's the twist. Elon Musk is considering something that contradicts everything Starship represents, throwing it away instead of reusing it. Why would the king of reusability suddenly trash his own masterpiece? And could this insane move actually be the only way to beat China to the moon? Let's go back to 1969. The Saturn V launched the command module and lunar module straight to the moon. Once there, astronauts entered low lunar orbit, descended to the surface, did their work, blasted off, and came home. It was incredibly complex, but it worked. Now here's what nobody talks about. That entire Apollo architecture was simpler than what NASA is attempting today with far more advanced technology. The Space Launch System took over a decade to develop. Orion took nearly 2 decades. Together, they've consumed over $30 billion. And despite all that time and money, Orion can't even do what the Apollo command module did in the 1960s. It can't enter low lunar orbit and still have enough fuel to return home. Instead, it gets stuck in something called a near-rectilinear halo orbit, a strange elliptical path that's much farther from the moon's surface. Why design a system that's less capable than 60-year-old technology? The answer reveals everything wrong with modern NASA contracting. Boeing and Lockheed Martin got paid regardless of performance. Cost overruns didn't hurt them. They just extended timelines and collected more money. The result is a crew capsule that demands the entire mission architecture bend around its limitations. And that's exactly what happened. NASA's solution was to outsource the hardest part of the mission to someone else. They needed a lunar lander that could travel to the moon independently, stop at this distant orbit, pick up astronauts from Orion, descend to the surface, keep the crew alive for a week, then launch back to that same high orbit for crew transfer. This lander has a far more difficult job than either SLS or Orion combined. Blue Origin, partnering with Lockheed Martin, bid nearly $6 billion for this contract. These were the same legacy contractors who'd just delivered the painfully slow SLS and Orion programs. Then SpaceX walked in with a $2.9 billion bid, less than half of Blue Origin's price, and just 9% of what NASA had already spent on SLS and Orion. NASA took the low bid, and the aerospace establishment lost their minds. But here's what makes this situation truly bizarre. SpaceX has to solve a problem that's actually harder than the one NASA failed to solve, and they're expected to do it faster and cheaper. The current plan requires launching multiple Starships in rapid succession to refuel a tanker in orbit through cryogenic fuel transfer, something never attempted before. NASA officials suggested this could take high teens launches. SpaceX says fewer. Either way, these launches must happen within weeks to minimize fuel boil-off. Once the tanker is full, another Starship docks with it, fuels up, and heads to the moon. It docks with Orion carrying 4 astronauts launched separately on SLS. 2 transfer to Starship, land for a week, launch back up, dock again. Then Orion brings everyone home. Critics look at this architecture and see a house of cards. Dozens of launches, untested technology, countless failure points, and then the same critics turn around and complain that SpaceX is moving too slowly. Think about that logic. Since Artemis 1 flew, Starship has launched 11 times. SLS has flown once. Who's actually slow here? This is where the story gets interesting, because SpaceX recently made a statement that changed everything. We are formally assessing a simplified mission architecture and concept of operations that we believe will result in a faster return to the moon, while simultaneously improving crew safety. They didn't reveal details, but we can connect the dots. What if SpaceX throws away the very thing that makes Starship revolutionary, reusability? An expendable Starship propellant depot changes the entire equation. No heat shield, no landing systems, no flaps, no fuel reserves for return. All that mass and complexity vanishes. What you get instead is a vehicle that can deliver roughly 200 metric tons to low Earth orbit in a single launch. Now here's the brilliant part. Pack a 200-ton space tug using storable propellants inside that depot Starship. Launch it on a suborbital trajectory, extract the tug, and suddenly you have something NASA never anticipated. The ability to move massive hardware through cislunar space in single pieces, not in the tiny fragments that traditional mission architecture demands. SpaceX has already proven it can put Starship on suborbital trajectories. This isn't theoretical anymore. What makes this approach genius is that it sidesteps the entire refueling complexity that critics fixate on. One launch, one massive delivery. The tug handles everything else. Compare this to Blue Origin's approach. They're proposing multiple versions of Blue Moon, Mark I, as space tugs moving a separate crew cabin. It's more conservative, lower risk, and their New Glenn rocket is coming online. They might even pull off a demonstration landing around 2026. But there's a catch. They still need to design and build a human-rated crew cabin from scratch, something Blue Origin has almost no experience with. Doug Lavero, former NASA Associate Administrator, suggested another modification. Place Orion in lower lunar orbit instead of that distant halo orbit. This single change would reduce required tanker launches and make emergency crew return easier. Even NASA might accept this adjustment despite their legendary inflexibility. But step back and look at the philosophical difference here. Since the space age began, engineers have obsessed over shaving grams. On the Perseverance rover, components were tracked to 1/10 of a gram, the weight of a postage stamp, on a vehicle weighing over a ton. This made sense when payload capacity was brutally limited. Starship destroys that paradigm. SpaceX understands you can't build cities on other worlds by counting grams. Every failed Mars architecture in history tried cramming massive ambitions into tiny payload fairings with impossible mass budgets. While the industry still plays the minimization game, SpaceX is maximizing mass delivery. This is why the question isn't really about Artemis anymore. How does SLS ever lead to sustainable lunar or Martian cities? Do you build 1,000 more SLS rockets, or do you build a fleet of Starships for 1,000th of the cost? The expendable Starship concept isn't just about winning a race with China. It's about proving that the entire aerospace industry has been solving the wrong problem for decades. They've been trying to make rockets more efficient when they should have been making space access more abundant. And if this gamble works, it won't just put Americans back on the moon faster. It will prove that sometimes the craziest solution is actually the most practical one. So here's what makes Elon Musk's throwaway Starship idea truly brilliant. It's not actually about throwing anything away. It's about throwing away the old rules entirely. For 60 years, aerospace companies made fortunes by making things complicated. More development time meant more money. Endless testing meant extended contracts. Mass optimization meant job security for armies of engineers. The system rewarded complexity, not results. SpaceX is doing the opposite. They're building Starships so fast and so cheap that treating one as expendable doesn't hurt. It accelerates. That 200-ton capability from a single disposable launch delivers more payload than dozens of traditional missions combined. And it does it now, not 20 years from now. The real genius isn't the hardware. It's proving that abundance beats efficiency when you're trying to build a civilization beyond Earth. NASA spent $30 billion perfecting 2 vehicles that can barely reach lunar orbit. SpaceX might spend a fraction of that, throwing Starships away and still win the race. China is watching this too. They're building their own lunar program using the old playbook: careful, conservative, expensive. If SpaceX's gamble works, it won't just beat them to the moon. It will make their entire approach obsolete before they even launch. That's the race we're really watching. Not just America versus China, but two completely different visions of how humans expand into space. What do you think? Is throwing away Starship crazy or genius? Drop your take in the comments. And if this breakdown gave you a new perspective on the moon race, hit that like button and subscribe to New Space Review for more deep dives into what's really happening in space. We're just getting started.